Welcome to a World of Good podcast. I'm Nate Tatman.
And I'm Andrew Gale.
And we are two friends
who love Jesus,
care about the church,
and travel the world to share stories of people who do the same.
Our conversations happen in all kinds of places.
Like a coffee shop and an airport terminal.
Or even the back of a crowded taxi.
But no matter where we go, from Argentina to Zimbabwe,
we capture stories of the good God is doing around the world.
And we hope those stories will do you a world of good.
Well, welcome back to a World of Good podcast. I am Nate Tatman here with my co-host Andrew Gale.
Happy birthday to us. This is a 1 year anniversary of the start of a World of Good podcast. February of 2020. We had no idea what was going to come in 2020.
None whatsoever.
And yet we made it a full year.
We did. I'm
so excited we get to start season 3. I can't wait for what we have in store this season. And yeah, for those that are new to our listening to our podcast, you can sign up to get new episodes in your email inbox. There's tons of ways to connect. We have a website where you can learn more information about the podcast. It's www.chagglobal.org/aworldofgood. We also post updates on our Global Strategy Facebook page. We have an Instagram. You can search for A World of Good Podcast. And you can follow us on Twitter at A World of Good Pod. So lots of ways to connect in, to listen to the seasons prior, but we're so excited that you're joining us for this start to season 3.
Yeah, and with season 3 comes some changes to our podcast. So as we go throughout the season, you'll kind of get a feel for it. We've made some adjustments and improvements.
Yeah, they're going to be awesome.
Yeah, we're doing away with some of our segments that we love to do, but we felt they were necessary. But if you haven't yet, go back and listen to our trailer for season 3. We talk through quite a bit about the changes that we're making, the format, and especially the themes that we are going to be talking about. So we have 3 different themes that we're going to be talking through. And again, go back, listen to the trailer to find out what those themes are. But this first theme that we want to set up today is on global partnerships. And so we're doing a 3-part series centered around global partnerships, churches here in the United States partnering with missionaries, ministries, and organizations around the world.
Yeah.
Our first interview is with Alan MacDonald. Alan is a former missions pastor. Our second interview will be Samir Salibi. Samir works with refugees in Paris. And our third and final interview, and actually our third one is actually going to be more of a conversation with Josh Weger. Josh works with our global projects at Global Strategy, and so we're going to have a conversation with Josh following our interviews and our conversations with Alan and Samir. And so we're really excited about these conversations around global partnerships. And through this, we want to answer the one question, or the main question is, why is this an important topic or conversation from our side of the American church?
I think that's a great question. I actually think global partnerships is maybe one of the most important topics that the church is wrestling with and is going to wrestle with in the coming decades. So we're living in a world where technology and travel have made the world much closer, right? I mean, even during COVID, I can now sit down and watch church services from all around the world through the access that we have in technology. And so this means that local churches in the United States can have direct relationships with organizations and global churches, leaders on the ground, when in the past that was really only possible if you're part of a larger global organization that was working around the world, and that had the time and the resources to make those connections. So as it's become more common, and as churches are now making these kinds of relationships, there's a lot of challenges with that if we don't think through some of the cultural elements of global partnerships. And I think Alan helps us start that conversation in a really, really great way, giving us some really important handles for how we as the local church in the United States think about partnering globally with the global church.
Yeah, we hope that you enjoy this first episode with Alan MacDonald.
We are so excited to have a guest with us, Alan MacDonald, to come and share some great insights about global partnerships. But before we jump into that conversation, Alan, give us the really rough sketch of your history. What gets you to where you are today? I know that I have been able to get to know you. Both Nate and I have both been able to travel with you, to get to know you over the last decade. It's been a wonderful relationship. And there are stories upon stories upon stories that you could share. But I would love for those that are listening that don't know who you are, if you could just give a brief outline of kind of how you got to where you are today, the different kinds of things you've done, and some point in time we'll have you back on to tell all the crazy stories of experiences you've had in work at Cross Cultural Ministry. But for now, tell us about how you got to where you are today.
Well, first of all, I don't think of myself as a guest. I think of myself as an old friend.
That's true.
To you guys. And I'm just so grateful for that we've been on a shared journey, and we've been in different parts of the world together. And I just, again, I just appreciate all that I've learned from you guys, and, what a good cup of coffee is learning from Nate. So anyway, I was with Wycliffe Bible Translators and the Summer Institute of Linguistics for 32 years in Mexico, Philippines, China, and then came to Washington, D.C. to be the Director of International Relations for SIL International. And during that time, I started attending Fairfax Community Church. Got to know Rod Stafford, the senior pastor, and he approached me about coming on staff. They had never had anybody in kind of the missions position, and so he invited me to come on to the pastoral staff. And so for 11 years, I served at Fairfax Community Church as the pastor of global engagement. And that brought me into the world of the Church of God, missions, global strategy, and started a beautiful friendship and, working together. And then I returned to Wycliffe Bible Translators about a little over 3 years ago. And my focus was Eurasia and working on partnerships and collaboration around the Bible translation movement across a range of organizations and translation agencies. And last September, a lot of my work was required face-to-face in that part of the world: Central Asia, Middle East, North Africa, Russia. These are face-to-face cultures. And so my contribution was greatly constricted because of the pandemic and the inability to travel. And so I felt that it really wasn't good stewardship of either Wycliffe's resources or my time. And so I retired, but I don't really believe in retirement in September of last year. But now, it's a season of life where I can pick and choose what I want to be involved in. Don't plan on retiring, but I'm on a couple of boards. And one of the most fun things I'm doing right now is I'm leading a Bible study I have a Bible study group, actually 2 of them, for internationals. And so I have members of our small group that are in South America and also in China, and internationals around the U.S. and particularly here in Northern Virginia. And so that has been really a lot of fun. And so I'm just trying to be useful to the kingdom and going global by going more local.
But Alan, I think that's what I love about you, is that so much of your heart has been not just engaged in ministry, but walking with other people as they work to engage in ministry. And so many conversations that you and I have had have centered around, I was called to be a missions pastor with very little knowledge of what that meant or what that looked like. And I don't know that I would have had any idea what I was doing without the hours and hours and hours of conversation that we had. And just one thing I want to highlight, you said that you spent time in Mexico and in the Philippines and China. So you have some Latin American connections, you have Asian connections. You also, while you were at Fairfax, I know there had some significant connections in Africa and Zambia, as well as connections in Europe. So your work has stretched you globally, not even just specifically in one region, though you are a Mandarin speaker, right? I mean, but you've been really stretched globally in the work that you've done.
Yeah, no, and that's true because, I have more experience in a few places, but I have a lot of experience in many places. And, you mentioned about when you first moved into your role as a missions pastor, there was a steep learning curve there. For me, I never imagined in my wildest dreams that I would wind up as a missions pastor. My work has always involved governments, academics, and of the international organizations and some faith-based and some, intergovernmental organizations. And to wind up as the missions person at, a large church, I said, the book that says, everything I needed to know, I learned in kindergarten. Well, for me, it was almost like everything I needed to know, I learned on the other side, on
Yeah.
the field side. And so when I came into this role, I knew what was really helpful and what was really unhelpful. And especially as I received teams that were coming, because I did so in Mexico, in the Philippines, and also in China. And what I found was, it was a lot of work, and nobody was ever asking, what could we do that would help you move the ball down the field? It was always like, can you help us do X or Y? And of course, you want to be helpful. But so when I got into this role, it's like, okay, I know what would have been helpful to me, and we're going to shape a missions program that's really focused on serving. And it's not going to be about us. It's going to be about the people that we serve, and then mobilizing the skills, the expertise that's needed to help to respond to what, those expressed needs were.
Yeah.
And so that began to shape the whole kind of ethos of, how I wanted to do mission service.
That's so good.
Well, just to draw some lines for our listeners, because about a year or two, I think it was about a year or two, or maybe a little bit more after Andrew moved into his missions pastor's role, I moved into a similar role as well. And having no prior experience, I contacted Andrew, who then the three of us together, actually the two of us together, Andrew and I, began to ask you questions and to learn from you. And as we
travel together,
earlier, we would take trips together.
Yeah,
we would take trips together. Yeah. Andrew and I flew out to your house, and we had about a day or two of just kind of going through some of the things that we're actually going to be talking about today, just these global partnership principles. And so when Andrew and I started thinking through this conversation, there was nobody else that we wanted to have other than you on this episode to talk about global partnerships.
Absolutely.
And so those first few meetings, we kind of called ourselves the Off the Grid Gang.
Yeah, the Motley Crew.
And now the Motley Crew. And a few years later now, that has turned into or transitioned into the Global Strategy Roundtable. And so just to draw those lines, because some of those things that we talked about, the three of us talked about, the conversations we had, and really it stemmed from the bigger question of how can we do missions better in the local church here in the U.S. And ask some of those healthy questions. And that has moved into now this Global Strategy Roundtable to help other churches and pastors ask those same questions. How can we do missions better? And specifically as it relates to global partnerships, sister church partnerships, walking alongside missionaries and ministries and national leaders and, kind of all of the above. And so I guess just to kind of kick it off here, maybe just share with us what are some of those principles that you have lived by, that you have worked by, that you have experienced for yourself when it comes to global partnerships from a local church perspective.
Yeah, when we first started meeting and hanging out together, the three of us were in fairly large churches. And so, I, from many conversations, our concern has been, okay, a big church has the ability to do many things that a smaller church does, but not to devalue the impact, the kingdom impact of just the average size church, 100, 150 people. And so rather than like plans or policies, to me, what becomes important are values and principles, creating an ethos of missions where the congregation kind of unifies around that and sees that, whether it's a church of 100 or a church of 1,000, there is a significant kingdom contribution those congregations can make. And, and small churches can do things that large churches can't do as well. And so, over the years, several kind of principles or kind of what I would call the missional ethos began to develop. And part of it is to address that so much of missions often is about us, kind of what meets our needs for missional involvement, and trying to flip that to let's make our mission partners, our missionaries, our organizational partners that we serve, make them the focus. And so in terms of kind of the values, I think it's helpful to kind of work through what are we really committed to? What is God calling us to do as the body of Christ? One of the things that really drove us at Fairfax was commitment to the excluded, the marginalized, and those who suffered. So on one hand, there was compassionate ministries, kind of reflecting the compassionate heart of Christ. And then there was also kind of the equipping, theological equipping, serving where the church needed help in the larger context. And so in places where the gospel is constrained, we wanted to strengthen the local church as they responded in whatever their context is. The places where many don't have a chance to hear the good news of the gospel. So it's both compassionate ministry and serving the church in making the good news known. And it's called integral mission. It's combining serving the needs of the marginalized, the excluded, the physical needs, as well as the spiritual needs. It's not one or the other, or we just do evangelism, or we just do social work. It's really integrating those two that I feel are really important. The other thing too is, especially with large churches, they're in a position to do their own thing. You could send your own missionaries, you could create your own, mission agency in a sense, but we were committed to partnership. The thing is, why recreate kind of a second class ministry when there's ministries out there doing things really well? And so I think a big part is identifying those best practice, high performing ministries, and then seeking to partner and bringing what you have. It's sort of like the loaves and fishes. You empty your pockets and what has God given you as a congregation? And then what has God given others? And then you lay it out and see God multiply that in unexpected ways. So
great.
Building those partnerships really takes time. I've seen a lot of well-intentioned mission initiatives go down in flames because money showed up too soon. So leading with relationship rather than money is really important. And it's understanding how aligned you are in your kingdom values, missional values, approaches. There is a saying that I often quote in Chinese, which I really like. It illustrates often, sadly, some of the mission initiatives, and it's Tong Chuang Yi Meng, which means same bed, different dreams. You think you're, working together, but you have different goals in mind. And when you don't really have that deep relational connection, those things can happen. And I've seen money mess things up, far too often. And there's a very practical benefit too, because sadly, there's a lot of people out there that I call the money sharks. They will swim to wherever they see missions money in the water.
Yeah.
And when you say we want to be in a relationship and there's no guarantee of any money ever, being on the table, and just let's be in a relationship and let's talk. So the people that are really driven by, we're just trying to find resources, they tend to swim off. And others will say, okay, even if there's no prospect that, we'll become a part of your missions program, we value the relationship and the kind of shared learning. I think that's, is also a protection for us, in our missions. I would say one thing about, missions policies that, you don't want to nail everything down so much that the Holy Spirit doesn't have any room to operate. So, you're not saying, oh, you figure it all out and you do it the best, but even, trying to be conscientious and doing the best that you can, there needs to be spaces. And part of it, because we don't know everything, it does, we need to allow the Holy Spirit room to operate and do things that sometimes may not quite fit all your policies or whatever.
I
think
appreciate
another
that.
thing.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say, we can go back to some of those principles, because I know there's more that you're going to tease out there in terms of principles, but I have a kind of a follow-up with that idea of relationship, if I can. Mm-hmm. So sure. I hear that all the time, that one of the keys to global partnerships is about relationship. Lead with relationship. Think about relationship, not money. Mm-hmm. We read that in all kinds of different texts, When Helping Hurts, Walking with the Poor, lots of different international development, Christian transformative development is all around that idea of relationship. My question is pretty simple, but I'll flesh it out a little bit more. The question is just, how do we do that? Which I know seems really simple. So let me give a little bit more clarity. Culturally speaking, Americans, which is the primary audience of this podcast, Americans tend to be fairly individualistic. This makes us often, unaware of the webs of relationship behind the connections that we make when we engage in global partnerships. Americans tend to be high context, which means that we speak very directly. We can come across as offensive and brash or harsh. We tend to focus on outcomes. We're very efficiency-minded. And all of these characteristics can be challenging for relationships outside of our context. Within our context, they may work, but as soon as we start to engage the rest of the world, we realize that a lot of these other groups that we're working with, these other cultural groups we're working with, are in very different places in terms of their values. Many of the cultures are collectivist, not individualistic. They think about their connections in terms of relationship and in terms of other people that are involved. They tend to be lower context, which means they don't say exactly what they mean. They speak around things. Sometimes when you're talking to someone, they won't even say no. They'll continue to say maybe until you get the gist that they really want to say no, but they can't. And I wonder how do we do relationships when all of this is in play? When we work with people that may not want to move as fast as we want to, or they aren't looking for outcomes and efficiencies the way that we are. If we really want to be about relationship, if we really believe that is the crux of our engagement, how do we prioritize that? How do we do that?
Well, one of the things too, it requires time and it requires resources to make it happen. And so for some, it might seem like, well, this is really not a missions program to go and build relationships. And it is a kind of delicate process as well, because of not creating certain expectations. There's something that I've seen, and I describe it as getting past the yes, because, as you're saying, there's this power differential, because often we as Westerners can go to these places where the people that we're working with they don't have the same ability to come here. And so there's this power differential. And sometimes we can inadvertently force people and not even be aware of it. That's forcing them to operate outside their own cultural context.
Yes.
And so over time, you can get beyond this immediate yes. Whatever you want to do, it's like, yes. But it requires, like you say, a different kind of listening, a different kind of interaction.
Yeah.
Care about expectations, sensitivity to the power that you have, because you have money, you have, the ability to travel. And so, it's not a simple thing, but you kind of make it a goal and you learn from the experience of others. You referred to a couple of books, Andrew, and there are resources out there to help. But these kinds of things can be sometimes very ambiguous.
Yeah.
I often say that partnership is risky, vague, and messy. And lots of time, most of us want to avoid all of those things, but that's part of the cost of part of the foundation is laid for really effective, high performing, high kingdom impact partnerships.
So I think, yes, I think that not only do we want to avoid the vague and the messy, but the other layer of that is oftentimes if we're leading the missions engagement of a church, the global engagement of a church, we have people that are sitting in our churches, whether it's, other people in the congregation or pastors that also have expectations as well. And so part of it is helping them understand as well, what does it mean to lead with relationship, and that it is going to take time, it's going to take resources, it's going to take travel, that are all things that aren't going to produce the kinds of things that you can post in a video and put numbers on a screen immediately of the work that you've done, but it could lead to long-term lasting partnerships that could make incredible impact. So I think that's incredibly important and valuable. I just wanted to highlight that again.
Yeah, and I think most companies do due diligence before they enter a partnership. And then often as the church, we jump into things without that due diligence. And I've seen, examples where there is a really good story that's captivating and people get very excited and they want to support it, but there's more than meets the eye there, and I've seen it. I remember in Asia, one person would go from one Bible translation to organization to another, and he had a few pages of, I'm working on this translation for my people and I need your, help. And basically there wasn't really much there other than trying to generate income and kind of shopping this around to multiple Bible translation organizations. And so and it can sound really great and, oh yeah, we want to do this. But if you're not really, one, discerning what the Holy Spirit and what God is wanting you to do, and then doing your part of the due diligence. And this is where this commitment over time helps to smoke out some of these things that would be really kind of counterproductive. And, we also, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, just give us maybe a practical example or two of what do you mean about starting with relationship? What is that? What did that look like for you in the local church mission pastor context?
Well, in a couple of different contexts. One was with missionaries, people that were trying to raise support. Would you support us? This is what we're going to do. And for me, one of the challenges was that there would be people in the congregation that are like, I've been called and I'm ready to go out with whatever the mission was. And this is my home church, so you'll support me, right? And so I worked really hard and it was hard to say no, and this is why. And so we were able to reposition to kind of move those conversations, what I call upstream. I wanted people to come to me as the missions person when they first felt God tugging at their heart. Maybe God is leading me towards full-time cross-cultural service. And that's where you begin to have the conversation. And then that allows you to be in that kind of relationship over time. And so you're sort of like on the glide slope coming in for a landing at the airport. So we had several people that, were different altitudes towards that landing, but you're in relationship with them for 2-3 years. Often they have to pay off college debt. And so, you're shaping and kind of, it's a process of aligning, with the visions, values of the church missionally, so that, it's like, we're behind you. We're, rather than someone just coming and say, hey, you'll support me because this is the church I grew up in. And so we were able to shift that conversation. On the other side is with potential partners in other countries or organizations. Mm-hmm. If it's an organization with the people at headquarters, and start to build a relationship there, and then start to look at what field projects kind of are a best fit with what you feel God has called you to. And so I would meet with say like World Relief, country directors and staff in Malawi, and just begin to develop a relationship. And so sometimes when that country leader would come to the US, they'd come and stay with us for a day or two in our home and just have these kind of conversations over meals, hanging out, where you really get to know people. I think in today's world, it's difficult to establish trust relationships on Zoom. But once you've made that connection, Zoom is a tremendous resource for the church and to carry on these conversations. And so there's resources available now that weren't available 15, 20 years ago. And it's like, okay, how do we utilize these as a relational tool, piece of that? And so I think probably for every situation, it's a little bit different. But again, it's the more you know about the person and the ministry, I think the better the chances. It's going to be good stewardship of your missional dollars. Just along that line, I think lots of times we talk about stewarding our financial resources in terms of missions, but I think equally important is stewarding our human resources. So the focus on the people that we're raising up and working with, building into them. Every church has human resources in the congregation that have the capacity to contribute to their missional efforts. And in the case of Fairfax here in Washington, D.C., it's a very white-collar church. So we don't have people with construction skills or whatever. That's often how churches, mobilize people. But we had doctors, nurses, attorneys, project managers, crisis management people. And as you respond to your partner, what your partner's felt needs are, you can find those resources. And I think I remember, years ago, I used to say, well, I'm not a evangelist and I'm not this, so I don't really have anything to do with missions. And I was preparing to go into the foreign service, into the diplomatic work, and never imagined that those skills were valuable in a missions context. And I think there's a lot of people in the pews that have skills that they would say, oh, well, this doesn't, if you're a teacher, a doctor, or something like that, sure, we get that. But I'm an IT person or I'm an accountant. Well, some of the greatest needs are in accounting in missions, and most people don't realize that. Whether it's partners that need help, because we have had people with accounting backgrounds and business backgrounds help strengthen the internal financial controls of a local ministry. And which touches on another thing, is that I feel that one of the things that was really important for me, and we kind of made the shift to everything that we do is builds the capacity of our local partners. And so, often we want to go, and if it's a school, we want to go and teach the children or do summer school or vacation Bible school or something with the children. And what I say is, no, focus on the teachers, help better equip the teachers who teach the children. And so rather than going for a week or 14 days somewhere to do stuff, take that time and invest it in the people that are there 365 days a year and build their capacity to do what God has called them to do. And so it takes a whole range of different skills.
I love how you talk about kind of being that bridge between your local congregation and your church partners, whether locally or globally. And, when we think of the role of the missions pastor, we think primarily, or outreach pastor, we think primarily of those responsibilities outside of the church walls. But there's still a responsibility that mission pastors have, that outreach pastors have, of being within the church walls in regards to knowing the people, knowing the congregation, knowing their skills, their passions, their abilities, and building those relationships, and then identifying places where they would be of value and of service with your global partners. And I think that's, in a very real sense, that's discipleship. That's helping the local church grow in the way of making disciples and helping people to see how their gifts and their skills and abilities can be used in ministry context. Because again, like you said, a lot of people don't make that connection alone. And so I think that's so important to this conversation.
Yeah, that's, I'm glad you raised that point, because that internal piece within the congregation, it really is important. And what we worked on is moving people from, oh, I want to go to Jamaica to serve, moving away from kind of a geographic focus. And sometimes God uses that. But rather than saying, I want to go to Malawi, or I want to go to Kenya, or I want to go to Haiti or the Dominican Republic, moving people to say, here's my giftings, here's my skill set, here's how I'm wired, and where can that best be used? And so what I found, it was very labor intensive, because there was that same relationship building with partners. There's a relationship building with people in the congregation.
Yes.
Because you're getting to know them. And so there's a little bit of a matchmaking, because as I would get to know people and see their strengths and what they would bring, is like, the way you're gifted, wired, and the experience you have is really needed in Zambia with this particular partner. And this is how. And so it was so encouraging, because, I saw this shift, and part of it was through intentional training. We did a training to help people think through issues, and we had them read books like When Helping Hurts and Serving with Eyes Wide Open, and then begin to kind of wrestle with some of the issues. I remember, because I would have people read Serving with Wide Open. They get halfway through David Liberman's book and say, like, why are we going? And I'm like, keep reading to the end of the book, because it's not that we don't want to send people that are going to do damage unconsciously, unintentionally, but to be aware of these issues of why sometimes missions can be so problematic and does hurt. And that's shocking to some people, because they have this image of everything that we do is so great and so wonderful and so appreciated. It requires a kind of diving a little bit deeper and helping people move from what their understanding might be to something a little bit deeper. And it's a process, and it takes time. And you can't do it in one seminar and then everybody is on the same page. But I remember there's one attorney that often in the congregation, people come from other churches and have had previous mission experience. So part of my goal was always to help people unlearn things to relearn things,
right.
Because they have their image of what I also banned the use of short-term missions, because that was just my own little soapbox, because I felt like
that term, right?
We're about sustained relationships, and the modifier is the wrong thing. It's short-term missions. I don't want short-term missions. I want people to go for a period of time, but it leads to sustained relationships. And so I always reacted to that. My assistant, I always made her put $1 in the jar every time she did, and
which, by the way, that's why because of you, we called our short-term missions, using air quotes, we called them impact trips. For that very reason.
And it's just, again, to get away from that mentality of, I'm going for 2 weeks and I'm a missionary.
Yep.
And so, and there's an education piece in that, and it takes time. And I would love it when I would see the penny drop and they're like, yeah, I get it. Other thing too, in the church that I was in, people would say, yeah, I want to go on a mission trip. How much is it? I'll just write the check. And I'm like, slow your roll there. I'm not going to take your check. If I felt like, because we have to learn to receive as well as give. And I think this whole thing of write the check, it's another kind of aspect of it's all about me.
Yeah.
And I'm saying, when you do that, you deprive others that God is speaking to, provide the support and the, financial and prayer support that is needed. You are cutting people out from what God is wanting them to be a part of. And so I remember one person, she was so freaked out about asking people to support her. And so in a subsequent meeting, she came in and she was just blown away. She actually had received double what she needed to be a part of this mission trip, which then allowed her to put an equal amount into giving to the local ministry that we were going to serve,
Yeah.
And so it's helping people move away from it's about me. We want to go to this hot place at the coolest time of the year. We want to go to serve on a mission trip in Africa during safari season, because the only way, and those things the Caribbean. Are not bad. Yeah, and those things are not bad because it's kind of the overabundance of God's goodness. But if that's kind of I can get other people to pay for my vacation, and it's kind of squeezing those kinds of things out and understanding, no, it's about you. There's people that live there 365 days. And so you can survive a week or 10 days with 115 degrees in Iraq because people are there all the time. And it's this commitment that we will do what it takes to serve those who serve. Everybody wants to hold babies and have the joy of feeding hungry people, but that's for such a short period of time.
Yeah. How
do we strengthen the hands, encourage the hearts of those that are there every day of the year doing that? And you're not dipping in and dipping out. So,
which I think it connects to something that I think is really important, that I hear you saying something. I want to just kind of highlight that and lift it out. You talked about travel, and that travel is connected to those partnerships that you already have. And I just think that's something that's really important to point out, is that one of the values in the kind of global engagement that you're talking about is this idea of going deep with partnerships, not shallow, and that those kind of partnerships would permeate the life of the church, meaning that when the kids ministry decides that they want to raise money for something, that they would think about one of the partners that you're already working with, that it wouldn't become a pet project, or when the youth decides that they're going to do a summer trip, or when small groups that the engagement that the church would have, local, global, of engagement with ministries, with things that are happening, would actually permeate all the different aspects and groups that are a part of the church, so that you're all working with one vision and one goal together. Because when the church all works together, there's so much more opportunity to make an impact. And so you're saying that, but I just want to lift that out of how important that is. Some of this isn't just convincing your senior pastor that this is important and what to talk about on a Sunday morning, but it's also helping your kids ministry folks understand, or volunteers that work with youth understand the importance of engaging in these specific places for this specific kind of ministry.
Right. That's truly true. And I think you touch on a couple of things. One is, this year we're going to Jamaica. Next year we're going to the Dominican Republic. And the year after that, we're going to wherever. And there's not a sustained learning and a deepening. And so we would have people go multiple times. And on every subsequent trip, the relationships grow stronger. The understanding becomes deeper. You get out of the first time mode of Shazam. It's we're not in Kansas anymore, kind of thing. And then it becomes, no, I look forward because there's friends there. And and it reinforces, what I've seen too is common in many churches. Their mission connectedness is spread so widely and thinly that they don't really have kind of these strong partners, because we're giving $50 to this missionary, $50 to this one, $100 to this, it's spread so thin. So what I would say was that we say a big yes to a few things rather than a lot of little yeses. And, we're not trying to be everywhere with everybody, but focus on kind of a few. And the thing too is that everywhere you look, there are critical needs. They're really important, worthy things. And it's really hard to say no. But one of the most important things we do is to say no, to remain focused on those things that God has called us to. So we're not just responding to needs, but we're also responding to the vision of our partners, not where they are right now, but where God is calling them to. And then it's do we have a piece to help them realize what God has called them to by strengthening, what they're doing. And then, and you touched upon it, the long and deep. And this is in a sense, the payoff for all this investment in relationship and understanding and shared vision, because then you make a commitment and then you stick with it and you're in for the long haul. And it's not like, well, this year our primary goal is whatever, and then we'll support that. And then, next year or 3 years, we'll do this or that. And that long and deep is related to the big yes, because you can't really go long and deep, if you're a church and you have a small church and you have 10 or 15 things that you support, or a big church and you have 50 different things, because you don't really know your people or your partners when they're, so broad. And, I had many churches contact me and say, could you send me your annual report forms for your missionaries? And one, as a missionary on the field for many, many years, I just hated those things because I just felt they were not really meaningful. And you were just jumping through hoops to satisfy some missions committee that really didn't know you or your ministry. And so I would tell people, no, we don't even have an annual report, because I try to visit our missionaries, at least within 18 months. And I'm on, then it was Skype. I'm on a Skype call with them probably every 6 weeks.
Yeah.
And when I go, I just spend a couple of days sitting with them. I don't have an agenda. And so I know where our people are. I know what their challenges are. I know what their struggles are. I know kind of what their contribution is. And so I don't need, a report form, because we had a number where that was manageable. Fairfax was a very large church, but we had about 8 missionary units and about 8 global partners. And so that was manageable. The other thing was getting people to come around them, not trying to get the whole congregation involved with particular missionaries, but hey, here's a half a dozen people that are really committed to walking alongside of these missionaries. And Nathan, I know as you're preparing to go to Spain, there are churches and people like that who are just coming alongside of you and saying, what do you need? How you're doing? And to me, that was one of the great privileges of being a missionary. Because, I was thinking of friends that, if you're a plumber, nobody's coming up to you and say, hey, Nate, do you have all the wrenches that you need? How's it going? Are you getting enough work? Can I help you out? Do you have all the tools? For most people, nobody's asking those questions. But we're as missionaries in this very privileged position of people coming alongside of us and like, how's it going? How are you doing? Many people thought, well, support raising was a very onerous thing. Oh, just the thought of asking people, but, the more years passed, I thought, what a privileged position that people really care about us and what we're doing. And it only takes a handful of people. It doesn't have to be a whole congregation, but if there's a few people in any congregation that are willing to commit to come alongside of you and to pray for you, but also in a tangible way, just support, encourage. And then the other thing too is this kind of care piece where people in the congregation is like, in every church, there are the care people that you can spot, by the way that God has wired them, and saying, have you ever thought to use that ministry that gift of encouragement that God has given you to travel and just spend a little time with the folks that we've sent out from this church that we're a part of? And so there's so many ways that people in the congregation can serve. Just one caution though, I'm aware of other ministries where they say, people from this church have come 3 times just exploring whether they want to partner. And, we kind of stop everything and we help them, and there's nothing ever comes of it but another visit. And I say, it's sort of like that rain cloud that never rains, And so, everything is kind of there's a balance, you want to build relationships, but you don't want to make that I want a relationship with you, but my demands on you are very onerous, And it's like, oh, do it,
Yeah.
And we don't want to put our partners in this. Well, I feel that sometimes there is the conflict of interest.
Absolutely.
I found when I would be hosting teams, if my main supporting church wanted to do something, it was disconnected from anything I'm doing. Like, because I don't want to tick them off, because they're supporters. And it's kind of the same way with churches that are not, because they might become supporters, And so often you're in this conflict of interest position and almost forced to say yes, because you don't want to, make them mad at you and say, oh, we're not going to support those people. So in this kind of equipping piece, these things, as people become aware of them, then they become more sensitized to how they're interacting, and helps them, interact in much more positive and encouraging ways. I always say that local service precedes global service. What you're doing in your home church and in your community is pretty indicative of what you would be doing overseas. There's no transformation by aviation. You don't get on a plane. If you're not doing anything ministry related, serving in your local community, serving in your church, somehow getting on an airplane and off an airplane isn't going to transform you into a servant. All of a sudden, somehow, because you've been on an airplane, you become so much more spiritual. It doesn't work that way. So I always said, okay, I'm looking for people that are already serving and encouraging people to serve. And, sometimes we want everybody sign up. And I'm like, no, I don't want everybody to sign up. I want the people that God has chosen and have the knowledge, skills, and attitudes that are helpful. And we can, as mission pastors, we have a part in helping shape that. We need to be cultivating a heart of service in the people that we're ministering to in our congregations.
Yeah, a phrase that I love that's connected to that, Steve Rennick would always say, the vibrancy of your local witness is the validity of your global witness. Whether that's, whether that's a person or whether that's the church, like you have to have both. It's not one or the other, but the vibrancy of your local witness is the validity of your global witness. And I always love that phrase.
That's really great. Who did Rennick steal that from?
We'll have to call him up and ask.
Rennick, the mountain man,
That's
he
right.
moves to Colorado and he goes, Grizzly Adams on us. and like manner is like Nathan Tapman has gone from Grizzly Adams to like Mr. Clean Cut. I don't even recognize him anymore.
Well, Alan, this has been so great, and I know you have a lot more that you could share with us. We've only probably touched a little bit of some of these principles, and we will definitely have you back on and continue the conversation and have you share some more stories. But before we go, the name of the podcast is A World of Good podcast, and so we like to ask everybody, what is the good that God is doing in your world today, or at least your little corner of the world?
Well, the pandemic has impacted all of us and in different ways. And it's taken me from a constantly traveling to sitting here in Fairfax, Virginia. But I always say that there's an upside in the downside. And for me, it's like, okay, I'm such a global person, and now I'm stuck in one place. But what God has given me is leading 2 Bible studies for international folks. And these are both here in Northern Virginia, in different parts of the country, and in China, and
awesome.
in Colombia. And I would say half the group are fairly new believers. And I have doctors, university professors, visiting scholars, PhD students, and it's like, I'm a bear of little brains. So it's like, God, how did you connect me with these like really smart people? But, half of them, I would say, are relatively new believers, and the other half are not there yet. And the questions that they ask are really deep. And this has been just a great joy. And so we started out going through John, looking about what Jesus says about himself. And so I always pose a question. And when we were looking at Jesus and who he said he was, I said, if you could ask Jesus one question, what would it be? And so the responses range from, my father died 6 years ago. He never even heard the name of Jesus. Will I ever see my father again? Wow. Another Honduran in the group lost his wife, unexpectedly died. And his question, why is it that some people go through life with few problems and others suffer so greatly through no fault of their own? You know, I had an hour's conversation with one, a young PhD student, and her question was, is Christianity exclusive or inclusive? Was one. The other was, I look around and I see so many people claiming to be Christians, but who are so different from each other. I don't know who the real Christian is. Who, so
that's convicting.
So
absolutely
very convicting.
So, and again, it's like, I don't want to give the so-called Sunday school answers, because these are deep and profound questions. And so we spend a lot of time talking and processing. And I keep just pointing back to, what does Scripture say? What does Jesus say? And coming to answer the question, the most important question, who do you say I am? And so this has been an absolute joy. I'm also continuing to work with a few churches that are looking to reset their missions programs. So I still get to, before I'm at the point where they have to start wiping the drool and, like, now remember, focus.
Alan.
Alan,
you need to write you need to write a book.
Well,
yes.
I'm actually working on a memoir basically for my kids. And I had a New York acquisitions publisher editor after me to publish. And I'm like, the constraints on that. I'm writing this for my kids, and I don't want them to say, it has to be no more than 250 pages and it has to be this kind of stuff. And, I can do a book of lots of adventure stuff, but this is for my kids. I want them to understand I was not always the person that I am now. And I think you can probably relate to that, Nate. Because Andrew from birth.
Why are you pointing me out?
Well, because Andrew from birth was practically perfect.
Because I'm so young.
Way. Yeah. No, he was from birth. He was from birth, he was just the wonderful child. And some of us, had a little bit, a different journey. But, through the grace of God, we are not who we used to be. And I want, your kids kind of know you where you are now, but they didn't know you in that transformation that took place.
Yeah.
And so I want them to understand, I think fundamentally, that sometimes we think our greatest disappointment, discouragement, life is over. God has something so much greater that we could, like it says, we couldn't imagine. But God unfolds that on our journey. So I want my kids to see that great disappointments and discouragement is not the end of the story. But as you seek to follow God, it's a very different story. So anyway.
Alan, this has been so good. It's so good to be back together in conversation. I just love it.
Yeah. I just love being with, the three amigos riding again. Wherever there's injustice.
That's right. That's right.
Thanks for getting the mission field. Okay, blessings, guys. Great.
Hey, thanks so much for giving us some time today. We appreciate it, and we look forward to chatting with you again soon.
I love it. I'm so psyched up now, this is great. This is just, like old times.
Thank you, Alan.
Thanks for listening to A World of Good. A World of Good is a podcast production of Global Strategy and Church of God Ministries. Our theme song is Colorado by Leo Flores. If you want to join the conversation, visit us at Twitter at A World of Good Pod, on Instagram, A World of Good Podcast, or visit our website, chagglobal.org/A World of Good. And join us next time as we share more stories of good from around the world.